Welcome back to the first of the chapter on the middle game tactics, and we start with pin, which is a frequently occurring tactic in all stages of the game. Right from opening till the end, we can see pin coming it at one time or other. So first let us have a look at definition of a pin. You are said to be pinning a chessman when you attack it along a line. So basically, let us have a look at the definition in detail. In this position before you, here if white moves his rook to e1, he is said to be creating a pin. The knight here on e4 is now pinned as it cannot move because behind it is the stronger chessman, that is king. And when the piece which the pinned piece is shielding is the king, then such pinning is basically said to be absolute pin, because the pinned piece cannot move at all, it will be illegal. And what is the pattern you will see in pin is that three pieces are in the same line, one of the side which is doing the pinning and two of the defensive side which is under pin. So from this we can understand that pinning can be done by line pieces, that is rook, bishop and a queen. So pin takes place on a line, that is on the file, or on a rank by rook and queen, or by the bishop on a diagonal, also by the queen on a diagonal. So in this position, say after rook has moved to e1, we find that black has like literally run out of moves. If he moves his king, then the knight is lost. So there is only one way for him to protect this knight which is under attack by the rook, and that is by moving the pawn forward to d5. And now we know that rook is valued much more than a knight. It is worth 5 points, whereas a knight is worth 3 points. So it does not make sense to immediately capture this knight, as it will lead to a loss in material. But here, like we see that pin piece cannot move, the idea is to put more pressure on the pin piece, which can be done by moving the pawn to d3. And what we now find is that pin piece is attacked twice by the pawn and by the rook and defended only once by the pawn on d5. And now we also see that black has very few options. Say can move his king to f7 and get out of pin, but this will immediately lead to the capture of the knight on e4 by the pawn on d3. D captures e4, and after d captures e4, rook captures e4, we reach an elementary ending. So this is how the pin comes in the game. Now this was just a basic example. Let us go ahead with a complex example. And here I will demonstrate pin through a wonderful miniature played by Grandmaster John Nunn against another Grandmaster Kirill Georgiev at the Linares tournament of 1988. Basically, Linares, one of the strongest tournament that takes place annually, is considered as the Wimbledon of chess. The greatest minds of chess gather there to play in what is billed as a very big event. So here we see that Grandmaster John Nunn was white and his opponent Grandmaster Kirill Georgiev was black. White started with e4, black replied with c6, the famous Caro-Can defense to the e4 opening, made famous by two players, Horacio Caro and Marcus Ken. They put in lot of new ideas to this opening in the 20th century, and that's why it is credited to them. Though this opening is like very old, it has been mentioned earlier even in 16th century. White continued with d4 and now black plays d5. So that is the basic idea of Caro-Can as compared to like e6, the French. Here the bishop on c8 does not get voluntarily shut. So idea of c6 is the same, is to challenge the pawn on e4 with the d5 thrust. And now it is white who has to take a decision as to what to do. His pawn on e4 is under attack. He can has a lot of options. He can move forward, that is we call it the advanced variation of Caro-Kann. He can exchange it, basically the exchange variation, or he can defend it. So here we see Grandmaster John Nunn defending the pawn with knight to d2. There comes d takes e4, knight takes e4 and nd7. So basically this is like the nd7 variation. Idea of black is to bring in knight to f6, so that if at all the exchanges takes place, he will be in a position to recapture with the knight on d7, so that his pawn structure remains as it is. And now here, to the surprise of black, we find white opting for ng5. Our general opening theory states that a piece should not be moved twice in the opening unless there is reason to do so. But here, as I had said, that grandmasters have their own rules. They are very well prepared. They know when to break the rule and when to fall back. So here, Grandmaster John Nunn definitely must have prepared this idea, ng5, and to the amazement, or rather this one, Grandmaster Georgiev falls in for this and plays h6, trying to drive off the knight. This is basically not correct. He should have in fact continued with the idea of playing ng f6. That would have been fine. Now comes h6, and the surprise continues with white playing knight e6. Fantastic move, offering a knight right in the opening stage of the game. And now let us examine whether this sacrifice can be accepted. The answer is no. For example, f captures e6, there comes mate in 2, starting with queen h5, the line is opened and black has only one move, g6, and checkmate follows with queen captures g6. So now the problem for black is that knight is attacking the queen, so queen needs to move to safety, and of course we know that it is not possible to capture the knight. So black decided to play here queen a5 check, but in fact this allowed one more piece of white to develop with a tempo. Bishop d2 comes out, a minor piece comes out and attacks the queen. So now black will be required to spend one more tempo in getting the queen away from attack, and also he needs to guard this c7 square, because knight is threatening to come to c7 and create a double attack, a knight fork as we call it, attacking both the king, and after king moves out of check, the rook on a8 will be lost. That is why the only square from which this can be protected is by moving the queen to b6, and it appears that everything is okay for black. He is now expecting the normal knight captures f8, when black would not be allowed the privilege of castling, but he was okay with that. Anyway, that would not be as much destructive as what we say the check and mate or loss of material. But again, Grandmaster John Nunn continued the surprise. He played bishop to d3, and here now black did not get the point of bishop d3. Like we had seen earlier that when the queen was on d8, it was not possible to capture the knight. Let us just move back to this point, knight e6, and we had seen that it is not possible to play f captures e6 because there comes queen h5 check followed by mate in 2. But now with queen having moved away to a5 then followed by b6, there is an outlet for king on d8 if he accepts the sacrifice. And here black thought that he is winning a piece and went ahead with f captures e6. But to his surprise, there comes now queen h5 check, king to d8, and now we see bishop a5 bringing in about a pin from the long range with the support of queen on h5. Black continued for a few more moves after losing the queen, and then like white was able to win this beautiful miniature. Let us examine the point of bishop d3. What did black missed with bishop d3 as to why he opted for the knight sacrifice? Well, the purpose of bishop d3 was that after f into e6, queen h5 check, if at all black decides to play g6, then white needs his queen on 5th rank to bring in about a pin with bishop a5. So here he will capture this g6 pawn with his bishop and not the queen. What does it mean? That queen gets to stay on the 5th rank in helping in bringing about a pin. King d8 is the only move, and now we can see an absolute pin coming here and white winning the queen of black. So I hope you have understood that how the pin can come at different stages of the game, very frequently occurring tactic. Moving on to the next example, it's from the game between Lasker, Edward Lasker to be precise, played against Avala. Edward Lasker, a distant cousin of the longest reigning world chess champion, second world chess champion, Emmanuel Lasker. Of course, Edward Lasker himself was a great player. And here he is playing against Avala with white. And what do we see in terms of material is that black is enjoying a 1 pawn lead. That means both sides have got queen, rook and a minor piece each. But as compared to 6 pawns of white, black has 7. On the flip side, we see that even after so many exchanges, black king is still in the center. And basically what does it mean? That in fact black is not a pawn up, rather he is playing a rook down. That is the flip side, and means you don't castle, you don't give importance to castling, the privilege which is allowed only once in the game. We have learned time and again that you should not miss this privilege. This takes your king to safety and of course brings one of the next strongest piece after queen, that is rook, into action. So here now Lasker is able to win the game through a pin. He started with queen a4 check. And now let us examine the options which are available for black in this position. So with this check, first of all we see the rook on d1 controlling the entire d file. It means that black can block the check or can move to f8. These are the two options available to him. Let us first examine that what he played in the actual game. He went ahead with queen c6, hoping for exchange of queens and staying in the game. And before we move ahead with like what the actual combination from Lasker was, we see king f8 is outright a mistake. There will follow a mate in 2 starting with bishop h6. King to g8 will be the only response from black, and then queen e8 is the final checkmating move. So queen c6 and knight c6, even if we say like go back, these were the two options of blocking the check. Let us examine what happened to queen c6, and then of course we'll also examine knight c6. So now with queen c6, black is hoping that queens are put up for exchange, and then you'll be safely be able to come out of all this difficult position. But here now Lasker brought about a pin with a stunning rook sacrifice. He played rook to d8 check, and now what does this move do? This forces king into d8, and we see here in this position that knight on e7, which was the able defender for the queen on c6, is now under absolute pin. It means now the queen in reality does not have any defense. White was simply able to win the queen. Not only that, there follows further loss of material for black with queen a8 check, a skewer attack, or queen d6 check, and again an attack on the e7 knight. And with the move rook d8 check, like Avala resigned immediately. Let us examine what if he had played knight c6 instead and decides to block the check, so he also guards the d8 square also. Well, like here, for example, if white wants to win the queen of black, he can simply play rook d8 check, and there will follow queen captures d8 and bishop captures d8 and king captures d8. That will be fine, and white will play queen into c6. But here, like, there is much stronger continuation available to the move nc6. White will just go ahead with queen captures c6, offering queen again. And as can be seen, the alternative bishop king f8 leads to the same idea: bishop s6 check, king g8 and queen e8 mate, and of course the capture of the queen by the counterpart queen into c6 allows rook d8 check and mate. So I hope you have enjoyed this wonderful combination by Edward Lasker. Moving on to the next example, it's from the game between Espig and Nack, played in the year 1973 at Germany. And here, like, Espig, following in the Lasker's maxim that move of yours should contain a threat no matter how slight it is, had moved his rook to c4 with the idea of moving it to c7 to create a double attack and win a piece, the bishop on b7. But fell into the wrong side. There quickly followed rook captures f1, and suddenly we find that there is an imbalance in material. Both sides had a rook and a minor piece, but now with the text move rook captures f1, white is suddenly a piece down and therefore needs to capture this rook, and pin follows with bishop f1 here. So the rook on c4 is under absolute pin. So the only response for white is to move his pawn forward to b3 and support the rook on c4. But then, as we have learned, that whenever there is a pin and basically an absolute pin, put more pressure on the pin piece. Here we see black simply playing d5, and now he will be capturing the rook with his pawn and not with the bishop. So for example, after king moves out of pin say to e1, there follows d captures c4, b captures c4, bishop captures c4, threatening bishop into a2, and these two pawns will decide the course of the game. Easy win for black. I hope you have been able to understand as to how this combination came with an exchange sacrifice first. The rook into f1 was an exchange sacrifice, giving up rook for a minor piece. The concluding example from this chapter, and here we shall now have a look at relative pin. In the previous examples, we had basically seen absolute pin when the chessman behind the pinned piece was the king. Now, what is the difference between absolute pin and relative pin? In relative pin, the pinned piece is free to move, of course, at the risk of losing the stronger chessman behind it. But then one has to be very careful with relative pin. Do not go in for indiscriminate pinning, because we never know when such pinned piece will get out of the way. We basically call it unpinning. So you never know when unpinning will arise. This can best be described by a famous example, the Legal's is made, played by D. Kermer Legal, the teacher of Philidor, against a player Saint-Bray, and this was played at Paris Café de la Régence in the year 1787. So Legal was white, started with e4, black replied e5, knight f3, d6, bishop to c4, knight to c6, knight to c3. Development is continuing, and now all of a sudden we find black going in for the pinning with bishop g4. He has pinned the knight here on f3. Well, basically more standard was, instead of bishop g4, was to move his knight to f6. This would have been ideal, but of course, that leads to knight g5, basically such a two knights idea. So here we see black playing bishop g4, and to his surprise, legal played knight captures e5, unpinning. And here, black thought Sandbrai was a weak player. He thought that his great opponent has blundered and went on to capture the chessman behind the pinned piece, that is queen. But there followed bishop captures f7 check, king to e7 is the only move, and knight d5 to bring in about the famous legal trap, which has become a part of chess legend. So here that was the unpinning move, knight captures e5, which normally happens in a game. Of course, we know that this move, knight captures e5, basically is not a correct move. If black had given a little thought to this move, then he would have simply, instead of capturing the queen, he should have simply gone ahead with knight captures e5, and then what he would have done, he would have been a piece up. Not only that, he now protects his bishop, who in fact in turn is attacking the queen. That attack continues, and at the knight at the same time attacks the bishop on c4. So that should have brought a win for black. But here black was a weak player. He was tempted with the win of a queen more than a win of a knight, and went on ahead with bishop captures d1, and then we found him in the mating net with bishop captures e5, king e7, and knight d5. Well, but this idea of bishop g4 was later on expanded by other players, and then we come to early 20th century, I think year 1929 to be precise, when another French champion, André Cheron, was playing against Jean Los in a simultaneous display, and he reached basically the same position, and he knew that the legal trap, that is knight captures e5, is not sound, because if at all black goes ahead with knight captures e5, not tempted by a queen, he simply wins a piece, and there is no compensation for it. So he found out a quiet move h3. Now this innocuous looking move challenges the bishop, and here his opponent Jean Los decides to continue with the pin by moving it to h5. But then now the legacy's idea can easily come into the game. Without hesitation, Cheron played knight captures e7, and as like Sandbrai, even Jean Los was tempted with the gain of a queen, continued with bishop into d1 to allow mate into the famous legal trap once again coming into play. But imagine, what if after knight into e5, he had gone ahead with knight into e5? Well, in that case, we see that after unpinning, the bishop on h5 does not have protection, as if we see the legal trap when this position was there, bishop g4 and knight into e5 was there. So after knight into e5, the knight on e5 is giving protection to bishop on g4. But since after h3, bishop is on h5, after this unpinning move, knight captures e5, bishop is no longer protected. So here, when black plays knight captures e5, white can regain his piece. He is now a pawn plus, but of course it feels that white is losing one more piece with knight into c4. But then there comes queen b4 check. At the same time, it's a double attack on the knight, and after black gets out of check by moving his pawn to c6, there follows queen captures c6, and what do we see? That white is a pawn up, comfortable game, and won. So with this we conclude our examples on pin. I hope you have been able to understand the idea, the pattern which arises in pin. Remember that pinning comes when three pieces are on the same line, that is, it can be done either by a rook, bishop, or a queen. So pin can come on a file, on a rank, or on a diagonal. And again, to remember the pattern, that 3 pieces are there. One of the side which is doing the pinning, that is either rook, bishop, or a queen, and then 2 of the defending side. The first in the line is the pin piece, and on the same line, the second behind it, the stronger or valuable chessman. Now you will be required to solve the ensuing test positions. There are 18 of them in 3 parts, 6 each in part 1, 2 and 3. So basically you will be starting with part 1, then followed by part 2, and you can later on come to part 2 and 3 when you feel that okay, your strength has now increased and you are able to see a good number of moves ahead, calculate a good number of moves ahead. With this, I take your leave. I will be back with the solutions on pin. Bye for now.